She needs to show the badge, or I'll do it for her.
That's what Halston Pride said, compliance inspector for Thorn Ben Vale HOA, as he reached for the third button on my wife's blouse. His scanner was already aimed at her chest like it was a weapon. We were standing 5 feet from the Adobe Well, where the community's new surveillance kiosk had just started beeping like it was out for blood. "You're obstructing inspection protocol," he added, not even looking at her face. Elira's shoulders froze. Her blouse was pale linen, no sewn-on badge, no barcode, nothing except a faint ripple of panic running through the fabric as she took a half-step back. "That's enough," I said, stepping between them, my voice sharper than I meant. "That kiosk, the one beeping right now, I still own the source code." Halston paused. The scanner light twitched, and just for a moment, less than a breath, he realized something was off. That pause? It's why you should hit subscribe right now, because when a neighborhood enforcer tries to unbutton your wife's blouse in public, you don't ask questions. You open every gate in the system and drag the truth into daylight. You'll want to see what happens when the cameras don't lie. "My name's Cassian Ruth," I said. "Retired federal chain of custody auditor. Thornaben's kiosk system was built with a federal surveillance grant I helped evaluate. And I can tell you right now, your footage just went live to a DHS backup server in Virginia." Halston's hand hovered, still midair, not grabbing, not retreating, just confused. But Elira wasn't confused. She was humiliated. She was trembling under the shaded archway of the Adobe Well, the same place we'd stood on the day we signed our HOA agreement 2 years ago. The same bricks where we'd shared lemonade with the neighbors who now looked away. Her blouse wasn't regulation, and that was the whole point. She didn't wear the HOA-issued chest badge because she had a very real reason not to. 2 years ago, a man in uniform pulled her from her car during a mistaken warrant raid. She doesn't wear tags near her collarbone, doesn't let strangers reach toward her chest, doesn't even walk past TSA without her heart skipping a beat. And this man, Halston Pride, had just violated every inch of that boundary. The worst part? He thought he had the right. "You'll want to file a complaint then," he said finally, stepping back and tapping his tablet screen, like that made it all disappear. "No," I said, quieter now. "I'll just forward the footage to someone who doesn't need a complaint to start a federal review." That was the moment the HOA's spell broke, the illusion of policy, the false power in his clipboard and scanner. Because the moment you try to enforce humiliation, that's the moment the federal statutes start blinking red. I knelt beside Elira. Her fingers were still curled into fists. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The other residents were, pretending to check their phones. I didn't touch her, not yet, but I reached for the hem of her blouse and buttoned it back up, slowly, carefully, until that panic in the threads eased just enough for her to breathe. You see, this wasn't about a blouse. This was about control, about a man who thought a title and a tablet gave him permission to trespass on dignity, and about a woman who had trusted that our quiet little desert neighborhood wouldn't weaponize a scanner. The Adobe Well used to mean community. Now it meant surveillance. But here's the part Halston Pride never learned. The backup server he tried to erase, it's not just a mirror, it's authenticated, encrypted, and time-stamped with federal hash marks I helped standardize in 2019. So when he pushed that button, he recorded his own downfall. And when the footage went missing, he made it federal. And when it went federal, it went to my brother, U.S Marshal Drevin Routh. And Drevin? He doesn't take kindly to men who touch his sister-in-law without consent. They didn't apologize. The board didn't issue a statement. Halston didn't back down. There wasn't even a generic email acknowledging the incident. Just a folded notice in our mailbox the next morning, sealed in HOA blue. Resident Elira Routh. Citation, badge non-compliance. Incident level, Tier 2. Visual interference. Resolution required within 72 hours. No mention of what happened. No mention of hands or scanners or buttons. Just that phrase, visual interference, like my wife's blouse had disrupted the signal of their authority. Elira didn't say much. She folded the notice once, then again, until the paper cracked, and laid it on the kitchen table beside her tea. Her hands were calm. Her silence wasn't. At 9:04 a.m., the HOA portal updated our account. We'd been fined $25. By noon, 2 more citations followed, One was for shrub height obstruction along our walkway. The other, more bizarre, claimed entryway ambiance violation, citing a decorative wind chime that had apparently breached audio uniformity guidelines during HOA quiet hours. The wind chime was a gift from Elira's mother. She hadn't taken it down since the funeral. The doorbell rang at 12:37 p.m. A paper hanger on the knob, no knock. Another notice, pending lawn evaluation. Our lawn is rock and desert brush. There is no grass. By the time I refreshed the portal at 3 p.m., the fines had climbed to $625. And that was when I knew. This wasn't about the blouse. This wasn't about a badge. This was a warning. Retaliation dressed up as regulation. I sat at my desk and opened the surveillance portal. Thornben's HOA provides limited camera access for residents, external feeds only on a 5-day delay. But I wasn't there to scroll footage. I was there to check the logs. Each kiosk, each camera, each scanner at the Adobe Well was supposed to record data, entry time, badge scans, facial indexing. The logs should have been synced and clean. But the one for Elira's scan, marked as partial input, weather interference. That was the HOA's line. A thunderstorm fried the kiosk's uplink. Except it hadn't rained in Thornben for 3 days. The skies were bone dry and still. And I had screenshots of the weather logs to prove it. They were altering metadata, scrubbing camera input, creating artificial gaps in evidence trails. Problem was, they were bad at it. The timestamp on the interrupted scan was 08:13:47, and 15 seconds later, at 08:14:02, the kiosk's facial scanner registered a Tier 1 alert for another resident, confirming that the system had been fully operational after Elira's scan supposedly failed. They'd cut the camera feed only for her moment. It wasn't erasure, it was surgical removal. Someone inside the HOA was deliberately redacting incident footage before the public logs ever updated, probably at Halston's request. But Thornben's system wasn't designed locally. It was based on a federal grant program. Pilot surveillance tech rolled out under a joint compliance initiative with the DHS and a private contractor, Delavar Systems. I'd helped audit the first 3 deployments back in 2019. My name was on the metadata standard. So, when I say I know what data should be there, I mean it. And when I say the video's not gone, I know it isn't. The kiosk at the Adobe Well runs dual uploads, one to the HOA's internal storage, one to a remote server hosted by Delavar, part of the grant's redundancy clause. No local admin, not even Halston, could permanently delete that feed. They could hide it. They could lie about it. But the original was out there. So I began pulling system ID numbers, kiosk serials, upload keys, redundant network pings, anything I could use to trace the video through Delavar's mirror path. I didn't tell Elira what I was doing, not yet. She was sitting in the living room, sketching again for the first time in weeks. A half-finished graphite shape curled on the paper in front of her, a hand holding a thread. Her blouse from yesterday still hung over the back of the chair. I didn't touch it. Not until I was ready to finish what he started. The HOA clubhouse smelled like printer toner and citrus disinfectant. They always overcleaned the boardroom before committee meetings, like bleach and order went hand in hand. I sat 2 rows from the front, close enough to see Halston Pride's name tag flash as he leaned over a tablet, close enough to hear him chuckle under his breath. This was a garden committee meeting, not security, not compliance, not even about citations, just azaleas and mulch. But Halston Pride was there anyway, standing next to the HOA secretary like he owned the place. He was holding court with 3 board members, smirking like the Adobe Well incident never happened. Across from him, arms crossed tight over a red sweater, was Rienne Dalk. She hadn't looked up since I walked in. Rienne was the HOA secretary, officially responsible for meeting minutes, badge assignments, and kiosk coordination. Unofficially, she was the one who'd approved Elira's original opt-out form last year. We'd asked not to use the chest badge for trauma reasons. Rienne signed off on the exemption. Now she was pretending I didn't exist. I waded through 15 minutes of soil moisture reports and sun tolerance assessments. Halston never took his eyes off the tablet, and then, as if the meeting was already over, he leaned sideways and muttered something to Rienne, low enough to pass for a whisper, but just loud enough to cut through the room. Some residents think trauma's a free pass, but policy is still policy. Rienne didn't reply. Her knuckles whitened where she gripped her pen. I stayed seated, let it settle, let the words hang in the stale, citrus air. Because what I needed wasn't confrontation, not yet. What I needed was the hesitation. That half-second of hesitation from Rienne Dauk when Halston said what he said. That slight twitch of her eyebrow. The way her fingers stopped moving across the agenda sheet. It wasn't much. But I'd worked federal depositions for 15 years. I didn't need much. I just needed to confirm that someone had doubts. After the meeting, people filed out quickly. No eye contact, a few awkward nods. A neighbor offered me a forced smile and a flyer for the upcoming cactus swap. I took it without speaking. I waited until the crowd thinned. Rienne was still at the front, tucking her folder into a soft leather case with neat movements. She glanced at me only once, brief, sharp, then down again. I took a slow step forward. "Ms. Dauk," I said, keeping my voice low. "The footage from the Adobe Well. I know it exists, and I know you saw it." She didn't respond. She didn't move, but her hand paused halfway through zipping her case. "It was mirrored to a Delavar endpoint," I continued. "Same endpoint that holds the redundancy protocols for all federal beta kiosks. The HOA can't delete that, not even Halston." Rienne's fingers resumed their motion, calm now. Zipped the case shut with one smooth motion. When she looked up, her eyes were careful. Not warm, not cold, just measured. "I'm not authorized to speak to system redundancies," she said. "All public footage inquiries must go through formal request procedures." "Which require internal approval," I said, "which means Halston." She blinked once, then walked away without another word. But the pause had been there, the silence between zipper and answer, the breath she held before speaking, the flicker of tension in her shoulders when Halston spoke about trauma being a free pass. She knew. She had access. And she wasn't okay with what happened. I stepped out of the clubhouse and into the dry New Mexico dusk. The horizon was smeared with copper light, clouds thin as paper ash. Elira would be home by now. She'd texted earlier, just a photo of our porch, her sketch pad on the swing, the tea thermos beside it. No words, just presence. I stood there a moment longer, watching a small cactus bloom in the planter beside the HOA ramp, small and silent, but undeniable, like the look Rienne Dauk had given me when I said the footage wasn't gone. It was enough. The seed was there. All I had to do now was wait for it to push through the cracks. The next citation came before sunrise. A slip of paper, laminated, taped directly to the front door. No envelope this time. No folded note tucked politely into the mailbox. Just bold red lettering across the top. Property audit. Initiated. Tier 3. Enforcement. Pending. The rest of it read like a threat dressed as process. Unregistered ground fixtures, decorative obstruction, non-conforming materials. Infrared anomaly in the eastern window. Whatever that meant. It was signed by Halston Pride. The ink wasn't even dry when I peeled it off. I didn't show Elira. She was still asleep, curled beneath the old quilt her mother made. She'd had one good day yesterday. I wasn't going to poison the next one with Halston's garbage. Instead, I brewed coffee, walked the perimeter of the house, and started documenting. Every detail, every angle. If they wanted to make it formal, I'd make it forensic. That's what I used to do, after all. I audited land disputes and surveillance reports for 10 years before I retired. When pipeline companies lied about footage, when law enforcement lost evidence in chain of custody transfers, I was the one they brought in to reconstruct the gaps. Metadata doesn't lie when you know where to look, but HOA enforcement, that's different. It's casual tyranny, soft abuse. It hides in language like community standard and visual conformity. It doesn't need a badge, just a clipboard and an audience too polite to resist. At 10:12 a.m., I heard the rumble of tires. I stepped onto the porch just in time to see the HOA cart pulling up, one of those obnoxious electric ones wrapped in fake wood paneling. Two men in safety vests, clipboard in hand, pretending to measure the space between the porch steps and the property line. They didn't see me until I started taking pictures. One of them stiffened, the other just kept scribbling, like pretending not to notice would make me go away. "You'll want to note the timestamp on that," I said, holding up my phone. Because this house sits 7 feet back from the code-mandated easement line, has since 2003, county registered, pre-HOA. Neither one of them replied, but one stopped writing. I stepped off the porch slowly, keeping my phone raised. This audit wasn't approved by the board. I checked the calendar. There was no motion, no vote, just a name. Halston Pride. Still nothing. Then the younger one, probably new, muttered, "We're just following the list." Nodded. "Then your list's illegal." They left 5 minutes later. Didn't say another word. I uploaded everything, photos, timestamps, GPS pin, even the angle of the audit clipboard, to a private backup drive. Then I printed duplicates. Halston wasn't going to bury this under some revisionist HOA rewrite. But the important thing wasn't the cart or the audit. It was what came next. An email, sent at 11:04 a.m. through the HOA internal system, not addressed to me, but to every board member, plus the treasurer and secretary. It had been BCC'd to the full compliance subcommittee. Subject line: Resident Escalation, Potential Threat Assessment, Ruth Cassian. The body of the message was short. Resident has begun recording enforcement officers without permit. Refuses compliance. May be attempting to manipulate kiosk metadata. Recommend reevaluation of badge exemptions, particularly for spouse. RIVP integrity must be upheld. There it was. The move I'd been expecting. They weren't just retaliating now. They were reframing the entire incident, painting me as hostile, framing Elira's exemption as suspicious, turning our refusal into aggression. And the person who received that email, the one person who didn't delete it, Rianne Dauk. Her name appeared in the recipient log, but not in the forward list. She hadn't escalated it, hadn't commented, hadn't deleted it either. That was deliberate. She left it visible. She wanted me to see it, which meant something was shifting. Halston was pushing too hard, overreaching, drawing attention, and someone on the inside had started to question whether this game of enforcement was about safety or power. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. The wind chime, Elira's mother's, was turning slowly in the breeze. No noise, just motion. A quiet signal. I didn't need noise. I needed the system to keep moving just like that chime, just enough for the cracks to spread. And if Halston wanted to keep poking holes in the rules, I'd show him what it looked like when the rules pushed back. I waited until Elira fell asleep before I opened the private terminal in the back room. The blinds were already drawn. The little indicator light on my backup tower blinked steady and green, the way it had every night since I wired the node in after Thornben's surveillance contract went public. I didn't trust the HOA's cloud, never had. That's why I mirrored packet traces from every community camera that pinged near our property, not video, just data streams. Enough to build a map of kiosk behavior, enough to tell when something vanished. I wasn't looking for images, I was looking for the gap. Elira's scan had been recorded on Tuesday morning at 8:13:47. The HOA claimed the camera failed at 8:13:50. But the problem was, the upstream server at Delavar Systems, the company that made our kiosk infrastructure, still pinged back a successful confirmation at 8:14:06. That meant the file got there, which meant they lied. The Adobe Well kiosk didn't go dark. It transmitted, fully, including audio input, motion flagging, and optical readout. The packet size was consistent with a full minute of footage, but after 8:14:06, the HOA server showed nothing. That wasn't a failure. That was a manual omission. And there was only one way to create that kind of inconsistency. Someone had to log into the administrative override console using local credentials, which gave me the lead I needed. I opened the Delavar Systems beta deployment documentation. Most of the HOA didn't even know it was public. It listed kiosk serial numbers, beta hardware configurations, and, most importantly, the mirrored endpoint directory structure for federal redundancy compliance. Delavar's contract wasn't just with HOAs, it was with the Department of Homeland Security. These kiosks were part of a nationwide civil compliance pilot funded under a grant program for neighborhood security testing. Any footage marked Tier 2 or higher had to be duplicated and retained for 30 days. Elira's footage was Tier 2. The HOA flagged it as visual interference. That meant legally it had to exist on Delavar's federal mirror server, Encrypted, yes, but still subject to access under chain of custody standards. I logged into a secure tunnel and cross-referenced the kiosk serial number against the deployment manifest. The Adobe Well unit's mirrored endpoint identifier was listed as validev.com DHS-K17 Thorn Bend Well Stream Archive. The file index stopped publicly at 8:13:45, but a placeholder existed at 8:13:47, and .inc file that had been renamed to pending review. That wasn't a failure, that was redaction, which meant someone with HOA-level administrative credentials, someone like Halston, had flagged the footage to delay indexing. But unless they had Delavar clearance, they couldn't delete the backup. I pulled the metadata, checksum, intact. Chain of time codes, unbroken. The file existed. I couldn't open it, not without triggering a request flag. But I didn't need to. The moment I confirmed its presence, I documented everything. Timestamps, log files, encryption IDs, and most importantly, the lack of deletion tags. I compiled it into a digital affidavit, something that could withstand inspection from anyone who'd ever questioned a surveillance chain. Then I encrypted the package and uploaded it to 3 cold storage vaults under burner credentials. 1 in Nevada, 1 in Michigan, 1 routed through an old DOI beta sandbox, still online from my time in the department, because now it was real. Now I wasn't chasing shadows or hearsay. Now I had proof the HOA was hiding a federally protected surveillance file tied to a personal boundary violation on private property, something the DHS Oversight Board took very seriously. If Halston had kept his scanner to himself, if he hadn't tried to manipulate the footage, maybe this would have stayed small. But he escalated, he lied, and he left fingerprints on a server that wasn't his. That's when I closed the laptop and turned off the light. Not because I was finished, but because the next step wouldn't happen here. It would happen when I handed that package to the one person I trusted to walk it past every HOA, every subcommittee, every gatekeeper that thought they could scrub away what they'd done. My brother Drevin didn't knock on doors. He kicked them in, with warrants. And after tonight, he'd have everything he needed to write one. I didn't sleep, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't dare miss what came next. At 3:06 a.m., the system pinged again, this time from a shadow IP bouncing off an HOA maintenance terminal. Someone had attempted to access the Delavar server using credentials marked RIVP Alt Admin. It failed twice, then stopped. The log entry ended with a forced disconnect and a time delay flag, meaning whoever tried didn't have clearance, but had enough nerve to poke the federal mirror directly. Halston Pride was getting nervous. He knew the footage wasn't gone, and now he knew I knew it too. I stared at the blinking cursor on the terminal. I'd run out of time for passive documentation. This wasn't about citations anymore. It was about the pattern, the tactic. He pushed until victims folded, then buried the evidence under policy. Elira wasn't the first. She just didn't flinch fast enough. By morning, the next move was already unfolding. A notice slid under our door. Final enforcement review, 48 hours to comply or face property line evaluation. That was new. They'd jumped straight past intermediate stages. But I didn't shred it. I scanned it, logged the timestamp, and added it to the encrypted vault. Elira found me in the kitchen an hour later, staring at the screen with a mug of cold coffee in my hand. "You haven't come to bed in 2 nights," she said softly. I didn't look up at first. I couldn't. Not yet. "They accessed the federal endpoint," I said. "Tried to pull the footage themselves. Failed." She didn't ask who they were. She already knew. "Can they erase it?" "No, but they can run out the clock if no one acts." She stepped closer. Her fingers touched the edge of the mug, nudging it back toward me. "I'm tired, Cass." I finally met her eyes. So was I. But tired didn't mean done. "I need to go see him," I said. Elira's hand tensed just a little. "Drevin?" I nodded. "Will he do something?" "If I give him enough to act on without compromise, yes. If it meets jurisdiction. If the backup file is part of a grant-funded compliance system, then this isn't just an HOA matter anymore. It's federal. And under Title 18, Section 242, depriving someone of rights under color of law, that includes weaponized ID enforcement." She didn't smile, but something in her posture eased. You'll show him everything? I'll hand it, off the way I would have before I retired. Full chain of custody, redundant vaults, logs with signed timestamps, AI hash authentication. If it goes to court, it'll survive fire. She nodded once and turned away, walked to the porch. I followed her gaze through the window. The wind chime swung slowly above the railing. This place used to feel quiet, she said, voice low. Now it just feels watched. I didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. But quiet and safe weren't the same thing anymore. Halston had made sure of that. I grabbed my hard drive from the terminal, wrapped it in a lined case, and packed it into the gray Pelican box I hadn't used in years. Last time I'd opened it, I was still under contract, still flying to depositions in Washington and Reno and Phoenix. I checked the locks on the case twice. Then, I pulled my old audit badge from the drawer, the one with the worn silver DOI seal, and clipped it to my belt. Not because it was needed, because it meant something, because the man who touched my wife's blouse was about to find out that policy has limits, that the moment you violate the rules you hide behind, you become accountable to the ones you never thought would notice. I texted Drevin, need eyes on a federal endpoint, Delavar, RIVP mirror, physical handoff, today. He didn't respond with words, just a checkmark and a location ping. By dusk, I'd be standing in front of him with the full archive in hand. And by nightfall, the man who started all this would have no more places to hide. Drevin didn't ask questions when I arrived. He just opened the door to the off-grid field station he used for sensitive retrievals, an old ranch house converted into a satellite marshal post, 2 hours north of Thorn Bend, and stepped aside. No handshake, no greeting. Just a nod toward the inner den, and a gesture for me to set the case on the steel table beneath the window. The place hadn't changed since the last time I visited. Same cracked tile, same government-issued chairs, a bulletin board covered in overlapping warrants, a small safe embedded in the wall with no label and 3 locks. Is it clean? He asked. Triple vaulted, 2 in dead sectors, 1 sandboxed from a legacy DOI node. He didn't blink. Show me. I popped the Pelican case, slid out the drive, and placed it on the table like it held something dangerous. Because it did. He pulled on gloves, opened his secure terminal, and inserted the drive. No commentary, no skepticism, just methodical keys and soft light flickering across his face as he started verifying the logs. Checksum passed, encryption intact, chain of custody logs authenticated through Delavar's mirror schema, signed by 3 independent endpoints and a ghost node I knew Drevin would recognize from our father's old field work. He sat back, arms folded, and exhaled just once through his nose. This was a kiosk? Adobe Well, I said. Thornben Vale, Tier 2. Violation, flagged by HOA Compliance Inspector Halston Pride. He physically unbuttoned Elira's blouse in public while claiming to verify visual ID placement. Claimed there was no footage. HOA log shows weather interference. Delavar metadata proves the footage transmitted. You pulled the archive? No, I said. I pulled the proof it exists. Didn't touch the content. If I access it, it creates a dispute chain. If you request it through Title 18 jurisdiction, Delavar is obligated to comply. You're a direct federal actor. I'm not anymore. He nodded slowly. This inspector, he said. Any record of prior overreach? I tapped a second folder on the drive. Behavioral pattern file. 8 prior citations involving women, all Tier 2 or higher. No footage available in any of them. Patterns of vanishing video logs. HOA Secretary Ryan Dalk is showing signs of conflict. She handed off a mirror log last week. Didn't say a word, just gave me the file and walked away. He studied me for a long moment. You already knew it was enough, he said. Yeah. Then why hand it to me? Because if I file this myself, it gets buried in civil courts. If you pull the footage and confirm the override attempt, it crosses into civil rights abuse under color of law. Title 18, Section 242. I want this airtight, Drevin. No leaks, no second chances. He didn't answer right away. He just opened a secure channel, logged in with his Marshal credentials, and typed a sequence that would have triggered a federal record request. Then he leaned back in his chair and finally looked me in the eye. He touched your wife, he said. I nodded once. His jaw tightened. You want me to just follow protocol, he said. That's all I need." He stared out the window for a long moment. The desert stretched flat and sun-bleached beyond the horizon. The wind kicked dust in slow spirals across the back lot. Then he reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a thin black folder, one I recognized. The same kind we used to carry when we served physical warrants that couldn't wait on paperwork. "This stays sealed until we verify the contents," he said. "But if that footage shows what you say it does, I'm not walking into Thornben with a clipboard. I'm walking in with authorization and cuffs." I exhaled. Not relief, just readiness. Because after weeks of citations, silence, and soft retaliation dressed in HOA policy, this was the first time someone with real power said it out loud. If it's true, someone gets cuffed. That wasn't revenge. That was the procedure. That was accountability. And now it had a badge behind it. Drevin sent the request at 2:03 p.m. By 3:17, Delaver Systems responded. The footage was confirmed, fully intact, categorized under RIVP Tier 2 with an active federal mirror timestamp of 08 to 13:47 to 08 and 14:42. 35 seconds of high-resolution visual, infrared, and audio capture from the Adobe Well kiosk. It had been flagged by the HOA under pending review visual disturbance, but the deletion request was never authorized. And now, thanks to Drevin's request under the Marshal's jurisdiction, the file was officially placed on investigative hold, which meant Halston couldn't touch it, couldn't edit, replace, or overwrite. He couldn't even delay it without tripping a federal trace. That was the lock. Now, I needed the key. Drevin moved quickly. He drafted a preliminary summary of the file's existence, the HOA's fraudulent suppression, and Halston's potential misconduct under federal guidelines. Then he forwarded the report to the Office for Civil Rights, along with his badge signature and chain of custody package. But what mattered more was what he handed me in private, 2 sealed envelopes. One held a printed version of the footage authentication, a receipt with every signature, timestamp, and hash trail from the moment the kiosk recorded Elira's scan to the second the HOA flagged it as damaged. The other held a witness affidavit template. "You said someone on the inside gave you access," he said. "I need their voice on record. Doesn't need to be public. Doesn't even need to be notarized right now. But I need something from the person who saw what happened before the footage vanished." I knew who he meant. Rianne Dalk. She hadn't spoken a word when she gave me the backup log. She hadn't emailed, hadn't hinted, but she'd acted. And now, if this thing was going to survive more than headlines and quiet resignations, I needed her to act again. I drove back to Thornben that night with both envelopes in the passenger seat. The wind was picking up over the flats, dust curling under the headlights. I passed the south gate just before 10, nodding at the tired security guard, who didn't even look up from his phone. The neighborhood was still. Too still. Halston hadn't made another move, but I knew his kind. He wouldn't stay quiet long. If he suspected the footage was retrieved, he'd shift tactics, reframe, discredit, maybe even find a way to smear Elira. I parked at the clubhouse, where the last of the board members were wrapping up a private session. I waited under the porch awning until they cleared out. Only one person lingered behind, head bowed, folder clutched tight under her arm. Rianne. She didn't flinch when she saw me, just stopped and stared, like she'd already been expecting this part. I walked forward and held out the second envelope. "I'm not asking you to take a side," I said. "I'm asking you to document what you already know." Her eyes flicked to the envelope. She didn't reach for it, not right away. "You have the footage?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "And you authenticated it?" "Fully." A long silence followed. Then she stepped closer and took the envelope with both hands, holding it like something fragile. Not out of fear, out of consequence. "I saw it," she said. "I watched the first 12 seconds. That's all they let me see before they flagged it. And it was exactly what you said." She didn't cry, didn't shake, just held the envelope tighter. "I don't need your name in lights," I said. "Just a sentence, one truth, enough to support what the footage already proves." She nodded once. "I'll send it tonight." And then she walked away, her footsteps soft against the tiles. Back home, Elira was asleep on the porch swing, sketchpad resting against her chest. The wind chimes stirred above her, faint but steady. I didn't wake her. I sat beside her and watched the stars shift overhead. The engine was running now. All I had to do was steer. I woke before the sun and opened the secure terminal. At 5:42 a.m., Rian's affidavit arrived. It was plain text, no signature, no formality. Just 12 lines, typed in clean, with the timestamp from her HOA login terminal at the bottom. Undeniable proof that she had authored it inside the administrative system. I, Rian Dalk, HOA Secretary for Thornben Vale, confirmed that I witnessed the initial footage from the Adobe Well kiosk on Tuesday morning. The file was clear. The resident, Elira Ruth, was stationary. No signs of resistance. Compliance Inspector Halston Pride approached her and unbuttoned her blouse. There was no warning, no justification. She did not grant permission. The file was flagged before the rest of the board viewed it. I was present when Halston requested internal suppression. I do not support the decision to conceal or alter this footage. It was everything we needed. I forwarded it to Drevin before the coffee even finished brewing. He replied 2 minutes later with a 2-letter confirmation. Received. Outside, the desert was still wrapped in shadow, but something had changed in the air, like the temperature had dipped just long enough to crack the hardened earth. You couldn't see it yet, but the ground had shifted. Elira was already on the porch, sketching quietly under a blanket. She looked up, saw the tightness in my jaw, and didn't ask. She just nodded, like she felt it too. Inside, I began assembling the final stage of the plan. Drevin had already requested the footage directly from Delavar. The DHS compliance team had confirmed jurisdiction, pending a formal review. That meant we had a narrow window, maybe 48 hours before Thornben's board received the notification. We had to get ahead of it. I reached out to 3 neighbors, people I trusted, the kind who always said good morning but didn't ask for favors. One of them, Marius, was a quiet contractor who'd been fined last year for using non-neutral siding tones on a shed his disabled son used for physical therapy. Another, Denise, had once been forced to remove a hummingbird feeder that violated skyline uniformity. I didn't tell them everything, just that we were preparing for a public record review, that Halston's enforcement tactics had crossed a line, and that the board would likely attempt to spin the outcome. I asked if they'd attend the next HOA session. They didn't hesitate. After what they did to you and Elira, Marius said, I'll bring my paperwork too. At noon, I walked the perimeter of the Adobe Well one more time. The kiosk stood silent beneath the shade arch. The badge scanner was idle. No one else was there. But I noticed something new. A flyer had been taped to the base of the terminal, neatly folded clear plastic sheath, like it had been done with care. I peeled it free and read the heading. Emergency Board Meeting, Community Enforcement Review, Location, Adobe. Well, open forum, date, Friday, 6 p.m. They were trying to get ahead of it. Halston was pushing a narrative. He'd preemptively called a meeting to control the fallout. But that was fine. Let him gather his allies. Let him prepare his speech and hand out his versions of policy. Because this time, we weren't walking in with citations or complaints. We were walking in with a federal archive and a sworn internal affidavit. I spent the rest of the afternoon building the prep deck, time logs, footage index, the metadata frame where the scanner's light flickered across Elira's blouse, the audio cue where Halston said, I'll do it for her. Every digital breath cataloged and matched against the audit file from Delavar's endpoint. I set up the projector rig, tested playback on a cold battery, then on mains. The entire file ran clean. No skipped frames, no static. Just the truth. Undeniable and quiet. That night, Elira didn't sketch. She sat beside me in the living room, one leg curled under her, watching the footage one more time as I loaded the final version. She didn't flinch. When the clip ended, she said, "Make them see it." I nodded, not for revenge, for the silence this had stolen from her. Friday arrived with a strange stillness. The wind had dropped out of the sky by mid-afternoon. No gusts, no breeze. The kind of silence that sits on your chest like pressure before a storm. Thornben felt too clean. Even the HOA golf carts had disappeared from their usual loops. No citations, no flyers. Just the sound of distant gravel crunching as a few residents drifted toward the Adobe Well Plaza. By 5:30, chairs had been unfolded in a half circle. A portable podium stood beneath the archway beside the scanner kiosk. The projector was already mounted to a low table, angled toward the stucco wall of the clubhouse exterior. I'd done a full run-through earlier that morning, timed transitions, tested the audio, trimmed the intro. There would be no glitches, no gaps, no room for them to claim confusion. At 5:55, the board arrived. Halston came in first, clipboard tucked tight against his chest like a shield. He was wearing the Navy HOA vest he always reserved for public meetings, the one with the stitched badge and the laminated RIVP manual poking from the side pocket. Rienne followed a few steps behind, quiet, expression unreadable, her folder clutched tight in her arms. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She'd already done her part. The rest of the board members filed in with carefully blank faces. Denise and Marius were already seated near the front. A few others nodded in my direction, but no one spoke. At 6:01, Halston stepped to the podium. "We're here to address concerns regarding recent enforcement interactions," he began, voice crisp. "As your compliance liaison, it's my duty to ensure visual identification standards are upheld across all common areas, including during digital check-ins." His eyes scanned the crowd, brief pause, calculated breath. "There have been some misunderstandings," he said. "We'll be presenting clarifications tonight to avoid misinformation." I stepped forward before he could say another word. "The clarifications can wait." I connected the projector with one cable, no hesitation. The screen blinked once, then snapped into focus. 35 seconds, one clip. Footage began to roll. The kiosk's camera showed the Adobe Well plaza. Clear resolution, quiet morning. Elira stepped into frame, her blouse neatly buttoned, her ID badge clipped to her bag strap. She stood still. No movement, no resistance. Then Halston stepped into frame, and the room went silent. We watched him say something, audio barely above ambient, but the microphone caught it. "She needs to show the badge, or I'll do it for her." We watched his hand rise. Button 1, button 2. The scanner light flickered as his hand moved toward her chest. Elira stepped back. He stepped forward. No verbal consent, no pause. Just movement and silence and the audible snap of the final button. When the clip ended, no one spoke, not right away. Then a voice broke the silence. "Is that you, Halston?" It was Marius. Halston didn't answer. He didn't move. I stepped to the side of the projector and held up the second document, Rienne's affidavit, printed in bold, signed, and time-stamped. "This is a sworn statement," I said. "It confirms the footage existed, that it was internally flagged, that it was withheld from the board under the pretense of system failure." I turned to the board. "And here's the chain of custody from Delavar Systems. The footage was recorded under a federal pilot program. The deletion request was unauthorized, and the attempt to suppress it constitutes evidence tampering under a federal compliance grant." Halston tried to speak then, but his mouth moved without sound. I didn't give him time to recover. "One of you knew, some of you didn't. But it doesn't matter now. The file's in the hands of a U.S. Marshal. The Department of Justice has been notified, and I've already received confirmation that an investigative hold has been issued for this HOA." Then I stepped back, and the projector blinked off. The plaza was silent. Elira stood near the edge of the crowd, arms folded, face unreadable. And Halston Pride, compliance inspector, enforcer, man with a scanner and a clipboard, took one step back, like the ground beneath him had shifted without warning, because it had. And now the cracks were finally showing. The sound of boots on concrete broke the silence. 3 of them, moving in sync, crisp and certain, the kind of rhythm you don't hear unless you've stood in a courtroom when something permanent is about to happen. Every head turned toward the clubhouse walkway. Marshal Drevin Routh stepped into view, flanked by 2 plainclothes agents from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They wore no badges on their chests, but the black folio in Drevin's hand bore the silver seal. Halston didn't move. Drevin didn't speak, not right away. He just walked through the center of the crowd, past the chairs, past the projector, stopping just shy of the kiosk where everything had started. He turned, opened the folder, and unfolded the warrant. "This property," he said, voice calm and heavy, "contains a surveillance system deployed under a federally funded pilot program. As of this evening, it is under investigative hold. No tampering, deletion, or rerouting of data will be permitted. Any attempt to obstruct this investigation will be met with immediate federal response. He handed the document to the head of the board. And this, he added, turning to face Halston, is for you. The second document was thinner, 2 pages. A formal citation of violation under Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Halston didn't reach for it. Drevin held it out, unmoving. Refusal to accept this constitutes obstruction. For a moment, it seemed like Halston might try, might argue, deflect, turn toward the board for support, but no one spoke, not even Rianne. She stood behind the podium now, silent and still, her expression unreadable. Halston's hand twitched once, then slowly closed around the paper. Drevin gave a slight nod. Effective immediately, he said. Mr. Pride is to be placed on administrative leave pending federal review. He is to turn over all access credentials to the HOA board and vacate his enforcement duties. Gasps rippled through the crowd, small ones, quiet, as if people were afraid to breathe too loudly. Halston stepped back from the kiosk. He reached for his tablet. His hand hovered above it for a moment before he pulled it from the clip on his belt and passed it to Rianne. She took it without a word. He looked at me then. Eyes narrowed, mouth set like concrete. You had no right to drag the feds into this, he muttered. I didn't respond. Drevin did. No one dragged us, he said. You invited us the moment you touched a woman without consent under a federally funded system. Halston stiffened. His mouth opened, closed. He turned toward the board again, but their eyes were downcast, their faces unreadable. And then he walked, not fast, just deliberate. Straight past the rows of chairs, past Denise, past Marius, past Alira, who didn't even blink as he passed her. He didn't look back. When he disappeared around the clubhouse, silence settled again. Then, quietly, Denise stood. I'd like to motion for interim reassignment of enforcement duties, she said, effective immediately. Rianne stepped forward and nodded. I second. A soft chorus of hands raised around them. Marius, 3 other residents, one of the newer board members. Rianne took a deep breath. As acting secretary, she said, I will log the vote and notify the Oversight Council by morning. She paused, glanced at me. Thank you for the documentation. I nodded once. Drevin turned to me next, quieter now. No badge, no folder. Just my brother again. We'll keep you updated, he said. But from what I've seen, this won't go away quietly. There'll be reviews, press, maybe a case. I'm not trying to go public, I said. I just wanted it to stop. It will, he replied. Now it has weight. The crowd had begun to disperse. Quiet voices, murmurs, the occasional shake of a head. Elira walked over and stood beside me. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. She looked at the kiosk one last time, then down at the ground, where Halston had stood. Did it feel like justice? She asked. No, I said. But it felt like something. She nodded. The projector light still glowed faintly on the wall behind us. And in the quiet that followed, it finally faded to black. Elira didn't want to go back to the Adobe Well at first, even after the review board stripped Halston's authority, even after the DOJ audit began, even after Rianne was sworn in as interim president and the enforcement clauses were frozen pending redraft. She still avoided that stretch of brick plaza where everything had unraveled. She said it felt poisoned, but something changed a week later. We were in the kitchen, the windows open to the early spring breeze, when she asked if I had the footage still saved on the external drive. I told her yes. She didn't ask to see it. She just nodded and turned back to her tea. Later that evening, she disappeared into the garage for almost an hour. When she came back, her hands were streaked with graphite and varnish, and under her arm was a wooden frame. I didn't ask what it was for, not until she told me. 3 days later, we returned to the Adobe Well. The scanner kiosk had been disconnected. The camera shutter had been removed. The post remained, a bare pole rooted in the center of the plaza like a leftover scar. Rianne met us there, along with Denise and Marius and a small group of residents who didn't ask questions. They just stood with us. Elira approached the base of the scanner and pulled something from her. Satchel. It was a plaque. Carved into the wood, in simple block lettering, were 7 words. Dignity is not a detail to verify. She knelt and bolted it to the kiosk's foundation herself. No speech, no ceremony, just the sound of metal biting into concrete. And when she stood, she stepped back beside me and didn't look away. Rianne was quiet for a while, then turned to the group. "I've spoken with the Oversight Committee," she said. "They've agreed to eliminate physical badge mandates and suspend kiosk scanning for all resident verification. We're replacing it with opt-in check-ins, digital logs, and manual override exemptions." She paused, then looked at Elira. "And we're naming the plaza." Everyone turned to the new sign, waiting. "From this point forward," Rianne said, "this will be known as Ruth Square." My breath caught. I turned to Elira, but she was already smiling, small, quiet, but real. It wasn't about fame or punishment or even public vindication. It was about taking back space, the very ground they used to hurt her, now bearing her name, not as a victim, as a standard. Later that night, we sat on the porch swing, the same one where Elira had once curled up in silence, sketching lines she couldn't explain. Now she held a fresh pad, the cover peeled back, a new design taking shape, no hesitation in her hand. "You never told me how long you knew the footage existed," she said softly. "Since the first night they said it didn't." She nodded, never lifting her pencil. "I'm glad you didn't stop." "I couldn't," I said. "Because if they can touch you without consequence, they can do it to anyone." The chime turned once overhead. Just one clean tone. Drevin called the next morning. The DOJ investigation was formally opened. Halston Pride had retained counsel. Multiple residents had come forward with corroborating claims. Charges were expected. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt weight. And under that weight, something better than closure: accountability. Thorn Bend changed its bylaws 3 weeks later. Scanners were removed. Fines were audited. Enforcement roles were split into oversight pairs, with all future footage shared openly in a resident archive. It wasn't perfect, but it was no longer silent. And sometimes, that's enough. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because the next time someone says it's just policy, you'll know what to do with that clipboard.